He's a wild creature. We can't ask him to be anything else.
You were speaking Russian, Bob!
Where is it?
Sit down!
Finish the job, son.
Eliza, honey, he's coming for you.
Hello and welcome to another in our series of Oscar podcast conversations. This is Glen Kaiser with the Dolby Institute, here with the Soundworks collection, and today we're focusing on The Shape of Water. It's kind of an interesting afternoon. It's Super Bowl Sunday here in Los Angeles, and we're in a hotel with these amazing artists, none of whom care about the Super Bowl at all because they're all Canadian.
It's on CFL. It's on CFL. It doesn't matter.
It's the American Grey Cup.
There you go.
It's like 4 downs.
Yeah. So what? Yeah. Who knows? So, Shape of Water, obviously nominated in both the sound editing and the sound mixing categories. So let's just go around and so Glenn, let's start with you. Just introduce yourself and what was your role on the film?
Yeah, I'm Glen Gauthier. I was the production sound mixer.
Chris Cooke, I was the lead re-recording mixer with dialogue and music.
Brad Zoern, I was the effects mixer.
Nelson Ferreira, I was the supervising dialogue and ADR editor.
Nathan Robitaille, and I was the sound designer and supervising sound editor.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming in and making the time today to talk to us. Shape of Water, obviously, just an amazing achievement. 13 Oscar nominations and nominated in both categories. So we put out on social media kind of a call for questions, and we got some good stuff back. But of course, one of the things that crops up is, and this is sort of a perennial pain point for a lot of us, is sort of like, why are there 2 Oscar categories for sound, and what's the difference? So I'm going to pitch that to you guys. How do you explain or differentiate between kind of the two categories for sound?
Well, it's Nelson, the sound editor. We deliver the ingredients, and these guys are the chefs. You know, I mean, that's what it is. And one is no more important than the other, but both are, you know,
equally important.
Are crucial in terms of
Absolutely
making something that tastes fantastic. Right?
Yeah.
They get the hot seat, we get the slow burn.
That's right.
Well put.
Yeah.
And then Glenn, obviously you're on the set, so
Yes.
you have a very different kind of aspect and awareness of this whole process. So tell us a little bit about the production process for Shape of Water and being on the set with Guillermo and how that all that went down.
Well, you know, it's as you know, it's we block a scene. I figure out how I'm going to record it. We watch the blocking, discuss how it's going to be shot, and then I decide how I'm going to record it, radio mics, booms, or a combination of both, obviously. And then it's a couple hours while we watch the lighting guys go to work, and then it's a few minutes of pure panic. But and it's go. But it's the process of blocking and rehearsing and deciding what they want to do and how we want to shoot it that determines how I'm going to do my job, basically.
So obviously with this film, it's set in 1962. It's a period piece. Was most of this shot on stage, or was there a lot of location work?
Most of it was shot on stage. I actually about 50-50. I think we did about 6 or 7 weeks of stage work and then 5 weeks out. So.
Do you have a preference for stage work versus location work?
Well, I always like stage work better. We have a little more control.
Easier to get clean tracks.
Easier to get clean tracks, and you know, location work, depending on where you shoot it, can be difficult depending on what what control we have out there.
Yeah.
But even on the stage side of it, there was lots of business going on because Guillermo is very visual. He wants steam, he wants water running, he wants all these visual things to come into play. So you're always dealing with that.
Yeah.
And now movies generally are made multi-camera, so you're dealing with wide and tights and that sort of business. So that we used a lot of radio mics on this show, and a combination of radios and booms, as the dialogue editor can attest to. And that's.
So tell me about the challenges of, obviously, two of your main characters in this film have no language. They're functionally mute. And obviously one of them, the creature is in a rubber suit. So was that a particularly noisy challenge on the set? Or how
the rubber suit was pretty quiet, actually. And actually, it was nice approaching a scene. I didn't have to worry about Sally's dialogue at all. And if you've seen the film, then you know Richard Jenkins, whenever Sally does her sign language, Richard almost interprets what she's saying. So the audience gets the gist of what's going on pretty quickly.
It's amazing how emotionally expressive those two characters are, considering
Really
they don't use spoken language. I presume that sound design will come in at some point to talk about that. But let's just follow this through for for a moment. So, Glen, you're recording the sound on set, and what are you providing to editorial? Are you providing are you mixing on the fly and providing a 2-track?
I give them a mix, a mono mix, and then 7 or 8 channels of isolated tracks.
However many microphones you're running on the set. And then all that material eventually finds its way to Nelson, right? And so I think, this podcast is kind of an interesting, mixture of, we have a lot of professionals who listen to this, but we also have a lot of film students and a lot of just film aficionados. So for those who might not really necessarily understand, what does a dialogue editor do, and what's your role in kind of piecing together the track for the film?
I don't know if I've ever been asked that before.
I find a lot of people don't really understand what dialogue editing means.
Yeah, I mean, so in the picture, I mean, it starts in picture. I mean, they're using a mix down, basically, of what Glen does, the best possible mics to be able to kind of sell their cut, right? And just make it just the sort of best common denominator of everything that Glen has provided, right? I'll then take that, and basically the tracks, Glen's original tracks will all be conformed, so I'll have the split mics for everything. So if he's gone 7 wide or 8 wide or 6 wide, whatever it is, listen to everything, assess technically kind of what works, choose the best mics for whatever situation that it is, right? To kind of shape the dialogue for whatever scene it is, right? Whatever room we're in, whether it's larger room, smaller room, whatever, right? And sometimes it's a combination of mics that'll work better, right? Sure. And so we'll basically do that. Dialogue editor, well, someone in my position will, make an assessment technically on what works, what doesn't work, if anything needs to be replaced, which was very rare in this movie. The pickup was outstanding in this movie. We did almost no technical ADR except for what we call just write-off scenes, which, rain machines, wind machines. I mean, we had to ADR an entire scene, a big finale with Michael Shannon and Michael Stahlbar, because you couldn't even cut the scene because you couldn't hear the dialogue.
You're talking about the scene where Michael Shannon or Michael Stolberg gets shot at the end.
Exactly, yeah. So they couldn't even cut the picture
gig.
because you couldn't hear the dialogue. So we had to bring them in, re-record the dialogue.
Cut the picture. That's
re-record
amazing.
the dialogue just so that they could present the film. That's how bad it sounded, right? And it's unavoidable, right? Outside of that, it was perfect pickup in certain situations, not on this film, but you'll listen for things like accent, sometimes performance. You'll make recommendations to the director. Look, that's not quite working. Maybe we should try and cover it just in case, right? And just basically generate an ADR list, haul the actors back in, beg them to redo their lines for whatever reason, and they're very, very accommodating. They certainly were on this movie. They replace the lines, we cut them in and make it seamless, make it fit perfectly, like seamless with the production dialogue that's already there. Present it to Chris, who just makes it skate. Yeah.
That's great.
Those rain scenes was a massive amount of water being poured on the actors. Massive amount.
It was
that
terrible.
You probably don't see it so much on the screen, but it was probably triple what would be in any other rain scene in a movie.
Well, isn't it because the rains are such an important plot point? Like, the characters have spent, the whole escape of the creature is timed to when the rains are going to start. So you couldn't have kind of a half-assed rain.
It wasn't going to be a mist.
No,
yeah,
not a mist.
Yeah, and I had
it wasn't a misty day.
I had the experience of working with Guillermo a couple of times up at Skywalker Sound, and he doesn't do half-assed.
No. If it's in the script,
He's got one
goes
speed.
all out, man. He swings for the fences.
He's got one speed.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the process of working with picture editorial, and then how did post-production go? At what point did you guys get involved in the film?
Early.
Yeah.
Early. Yeah, we went in pretty early. It was months in advance of when we were actually scheduled to start post sound. Partially due to the practicality of weather. Up in Canada, it gets cold, so we can't record cars. We can't record. There are some things that we can't record, so we're limited by the seasons up there a little bit more. And so we needed access to the vehicles so that we could go out and record those. And we were, lucky enough that the guys on set were able to give us access to those when they weren't on camera.
Oh, so you guys actually started during
the
production
actual,
while
they were shooting. There would be off nights where, they would nervously hand us a driver and a vehicle that needed to shoot the next day.
The keys to the pristine Cadillac.
Yeah,
right?
well, we didn't get the pristine Cadillac. It's that. Glen can fill you in on that story a little bit better than I can. That had an unfortunate incident. And so we got another Cadillac. Different. It wasn't the beautiful teal. But it was the same model of Cadillac.
Fortunately, the color doesn't really
register. We weren't recording the color that night.
we
we turned that down. But no, they actually were able to help us coordinate the authentic vehicles for the show. And
did you have access to the van? Because that was a pretty
that thing
rare,
was a nightmare.
rare vehicle. That one.
And
why was the van a nightmare? So this is Richard Jenkins' van that they smuggled.
The little brown van.
So I have a question for you guys. I've just been calling him the Creature. Did you guys come up with a nickname for him?
The Asset.
Or the Asset. We called him Fishman.
I affectionately called him Arthur B. Fishman, but I didn't really share that with you guys.
No, but Cam and Guillermo. I mean, we called him Fishman.
Fishman.
Yeah.
Okay, so the van was a panel van basically that they take Fishman out in, right?
Yeah, it was an old Econoline. It was an old Ford Econoline
1962
van.
Econoline.
Yeah,
right?
and I think earlier than that, right? Because it's already beaten up in the movie, which takes place in.
Well, yeah, Richard Jenkins probably wouldn't have a brand new van.
He wouldn't. Yeah, he was. Yeah, that wasn't fresh off the lot. And so we had this panel van, and I remember talking to the vehicle coordinator, and he was like, okay, but we're gonna have one of our mechanics drive it because it takes a little bit of Fonzie to get it to start and stay running. You know what I mean? Like you kind of need to know what you're doing. And so some of the time we spent out that night recording that car was a little bit of mechanic love.
That's great.
To get it up
started.
To get it up and purring again. But man, does it have a sound, eh? That thing's it's got a very unique sound. The engine compartment is between the driver and passenger seats underneath.
What?
Like honestly, the engine compartment is between those two seats, and there's just like a single layer of sheet metal covering the engine, and there are holes. So we were able to get little.
You're sitting on top of the engine.
Basically, yeah, and we were able to get those little DPA lav mics inside the engine bay through the holes, and sort of amp that up by beefing up the exhaust recording.
Well, yeah, and obviously once they steal Fishman, they're sort of not really driving around. They're not just puttering around. They're gunning that.
Oh yeah,
thing.
they haul it out of the lab.
The tire squeal of the van was a bit of a bone of contention during the mix.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. We got there. We got there.
Well, so how did you talk to me about the process of working with Guillermo and from a sound design, sound supervision standpoint? When did you start playing stuff back for him? How did you go about presenting stuff to him?
Well, Sydney and Cam would turn over quickly.
These are the picture editors?
Yeah. So Sydney Walensky is the picture editor, and Cam is the associate picture editor. And Cam was kind of the sort of right-hand man extension, sort of taking care of a lot of the sound elements, and then also making sure that I was getting deliveries. And so they would turn over a scene once it was cut, and they were close to being settled on it. And they would send that my way. That's kind of how we got started with the whole establishment of the creatures vocabulary. Sure. They sent over a scene. I assembled a build of it with kind of like a hacked together mix, just so that they could hear it with some reverbs and things they weren't expected to listen with their mix ears on. And then I would just send it back to them as a file. And then I would go into the picture room, the picture suite, and they would bring that file into the Avid, and we would just play through it and discuss. And it was a great way to work in the beginning when we were sort of just establishing things. Once things were established, then we kind of needed to roll up our sleeves a little bit more, and that's when the process kind of switched to I have a mobile system that I was able to take into the picture edit suite, and I could set it up in the next room so that they could be working on the cut. And then when they had a few minutes, they'd come over to me. We'd play things. I would have a full library at our disposal. So if there was something that wasn't working for Guillermo,
you moved over there and you were working on site?
In a mobile context, not long term. It would be, I think, I would call up and say, I think tomorrow's a good day for me to come in. I've got some stuff that'll work. Or I would get the request, can he come in? Can he, come in and present something? And so, that's kind of how we would work through it and hash through it. And that process kind of helped us establish and expand on the creature's vocabulary. That was the biggest, most useful way that we were able to use that time.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, obviously, listening to the most obvious challenge is the creature, Fishman. So
Fishman.
Fishman. Yeah,
Arthur B. Fishman.
Mr. Fishman to you. So what, walk me through conceptually, basically the sound design for Fishman, because I had the experience of I saw this film at Telluride at the film festival there, which I think was the first.
That was the first North American. Yeah,
was the first showing.
It was after the Venice. Venice was first, and then Telluride.
Right. And I was there for a Q&A with Guillermo after that first screening, and he first of all he's a riot. He's so funny.
He's an eloquently spoken riot.
He was really great, but he talked so. I mean, it became clear that he had spent so much time and energy on the visual design of the creature and the sculpting, and he sculpted the maquettes himself. Like he really got in with the production design team that was working on the creature and really did it with him. Was there a similar involvement for him with the sound of the creature? Because I can imagine that must have been equally important to him.
At first, no. It evolved though. I mean, at first there was a lot of room to breathe. It's in the script. We know what this guy's meant to be. He's not a monster. He's a creature. He's an entity, and he's a romantic lead. And so that was all kind of laid out in the first meeting. He touched on that, but he knew he didn't need to elaborate any more than the script already had. It would be a waste of time, and so it was kind of just a blank slate. For me personally, I knew that the audience would need to relate with this guy. He had to be a romantic lead. He had to be something that we can identify with.
If the love story doesn't work, there's no movie.
Well, that's exactly right. And so, in order to sort of meet the audience in the middle, right? Because you're asking a lot of the audience to get them to empathize with and be kind of on board with this beautiful relationship that develops between him and Eliza. Really the best way to start was with humanoid sounds. And so ultimately I wanted him to sound unusual and without being alien. I didn't want him to sound inhuman. And so I started with my own voice and then added animal sweeteners to that, some recordings to honor the gills, like the liquid rolling in his gills, because a lot of that is built into the script and the design and everything that you sort of touched on in terms of how much work went into building this creature. And then we, for final pass, brought Guillermo in, and he gave us a sort of breathing respiratory layer that sort of, once all of that got in there, and there a lot of massage went into that track, wide track, you wound up with something that sounded like a humanoid, a believable, convincing, inventive entity, a personality, right?
Guillermo talked early on, from our first meeting, about vocabulary and about the conversation went very quickly from what voice artist are we going to get to voice the creature to Nathan providing tests using his own voice, and the riddle was solved, right?
Immediate approval.
Immediate. No voice. We had our voice artist.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And he's here.
Yeah.
Right?
So did you got into SAG because of that?
I wish. I did get credited. Guillermo and I were credited for the voice of the creature.
So, but there's partially Guillermo's voice as well.
It is.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and this is what I mean. When I say that, the process with him evolved. I should say with them, because it was with Guillermo and with Sydney and with Cam. You know what I mean? That process evolved over time from being just sort of let's throw it at the wall and see if it sticks. You know what I mean? Well, hey, it's stuck. Now let's work on it. When I started bringing my system in to work with them in person, that's when the vocabulary started to expand. You know, because like when you focus on a single scene, you can really deck out one scene and detail it out and make it sound pretty and add every little steam hiss and, you know, create reverbs. But then when it's time to do the whole movie, you kind of have to broad strokes it, right? And so, you know, in the beginning, it was just like a one long pass of straight performance. And I played that for them, and it was missing so much because it's a single layer. It's a single channel of a creature that would ultimately become 64 tracks wide, you know what I mean? And so they, you know, I think that they got it though pretty quickly, because the notes I was getting back was, okay, so in this scene, the emotion isn't quite what we were going for, you know? Like when Strickland comes in to torture him and Eliza runs behind the banks, at first I wasn't sure if he was angry. You know, it was one of those rare situations.
You're talking about the emotional state of the
exactly,
of
and so
Fishman.
like that, yeah. Arthur's emotional state.
Yeah.
I should probably stop saying that in case that's like rabidly against what Guillermo would want. But yeah, in almost every single case, I mean, you got to tip your hat to Doug Jones's physical performance of that creature. In a few.
Doug Jones was the actor in the rubber suit.
He was in the rubber
set.
suit, yeah.
Okay.
And so, and he did it flawlessly. But there are some emotions that you can play physically that could be read one of two ways. And occasionally I would read it wrong. And so that was the use of that sort of first really vague, way too much leash zone where I could just be as creative as I wanted to be. The leash started getting pulled in once we started playing that stuff back. He could, Guillermo could help me like, no, this is really what we're going for here. I like this, I don't like that. And so I could make those tweaks. And then it was all about sort of, okay, now how do we give him range? How do we give him new words, new expressions, new ways to convey and express himself so that we know where he's coming from?
And my experience of Guillermo on the mixing stage is he doesn't waffle very much. He has an immediate reaction. You know how he's going to feel about stuff.
He's just like, exactly what he wants. He lays out exactly what he wants. Like there was early on, I think it was in the temp mix when we were doing the one scene where they're hauling the creature in the big cylinder container, and he's like, it's just not working. He's like, not working. I want you to go through every sound effect that makes up that sound one by one and name them. So it's like, okay, this is the first one. It's a low end. All right, it's a low end thing. He's writing it down. So we go through like the 10 tracks that make up that thing. He's like, okay, I don't want to hear that one. I don't want to hear this one named that one. I don't want to hear that one. All right, so just mute him. Plays back. There we go. Now it's working. He's like, no, bring up the name, the one that's named that. I want that one brought up 6 dBs.
6 dB.
6 dBs.
Yeah.
And he goes, this one I want a 4. Okay, there you go. All right, perfect.
Wow.
Yeah, and it wasn't posturing. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever worked with a director who understood your job more than him. Like he understands our jobs,
Yeah,
like what we do. He doesn't just describe the outcome and say, I want it to sound like this. He says, sometimes he talks you through it and says, look, do this to this and this to this in order to achieve this, right?
Well, he's an amazing craftsman.
Well, that's just it. Yeah, he gets his hands dirty, man. Like really. I mean, you're using the voice, right, for the creature. I mean, he, as an artist, I mean, I'm sure he loved doing it. I'm sure he relished it.
I have a question for Post. How much do you reference the script when you're cutting a picture? Because in that particular script, there was all kinds of description in the scene descriptions about texture and tones and whatnot. But when you're cutting a picture, when you read the script and refer to the script as you're going through, or do you just approach it from what you've given?
Usually, for me, Nelson will probably refer to the script a lot more than I will.
All the time.
From a sound design perspective.
Every hour.
From a sound design perspective, it's really more of a foundation. And so it depends. It's case by case. There are some where I'll go back to the script if I'm unsure about something. There are others where I read it sort of once and really I just get the gist and roll forward with it. On this one, this was a get the gist and roll forward because, I mean, it was such an unusual script for me to read. Like, I remember reading that script and just, right away I've got, it's a mute female lead against a completely sound design male lead. And so as a sound designer, You know, I was drooling. I was on a plane reading this, and I think I probably drooled. You know what I mean? And so I was very excited, but then I read on, and it became so much more than just that opportunity. It became such a special story that I feel like I just kind of connected with it then, and kind of formed my own opinions and ran with them.
Because when I read a script, before I start a movie, when I read a script, I'm looking at how many actors are in the scene, what's happening during the scene that could kill me, or what
What's
I'm going to have to
location?
deal with. And in that particular script, there was plenty of stuff that little nuances of what was going to take place during a scene and whatnot. So I was just curious.
But the outcome in the cutting room, it's often different, and any filmmaker will tell you that, is that the film evolves in editorial, and the intent that's in the script may take on a different life and a different shape through editorial.
Yeah, I mean, there are entire sections of the script that I was looking forward to seeing, and they just didn't make the cut. Like when he attacks the duck brush. You know,
Right.
That wasn't in the cut.
The turtle.
Yeah. The turtle story?
The turtle story.
Yeah.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, this is,
You never will.
you don't need to.
Oh, maybe the
Well,
director's cut. Maybe
you
the
could
deleted
probably
scenes?
piece
Yeah.
together the duck brush. That's the brush that Eliza brushes her shoe. Well, when the creature leaves the bathroom to explore the world, he goes to the fridge. He attacks the duck brush, thinking it's food. He does all these
Oh
other
my
things.
gosh, how funny,
and
yeah.
a lot of this stuff was shot, and we never saw it in the cut.
Tastes like cat.
Tastes like that.
Yeah.
So the vocalizations of the creature are one important part, but also just the breathing and the movement sound. So what was the approach to breathing and movement first, and then I've got another follow-up question about the creature.
Well, let's look at movement first. So that started with a conversation with Sidney Walensky, and he was, pretty specific about what he was looking for. He wanted to feel weight. This had to be, I don't know how tall with the suit Doug stands, but like Sidney's sort of pitch for it was like, this is a 7 foot tall Amazonian river god.
Right.
He has to sound like that.
Right.
There were frequent notes in the early stages where he has to sound wet. We're missing that wetness. We don't have that that moisture, you know what I mean? And on close-ups, we needed to hear scales and things like that. And that all kind of gets kicked over to Foley. And so, that was one of the large parts of my job in sort of wrangling the creature's sound, was collaborating with the guys at Foley 1.
And who did the Foley on the picture?
Steve Bain and Pete Prasad with Gina Wark. And I think they did a fantastic job, because like the feet sound heavy. That sounds like a large man. Sounds like a humanoid, entity. But the way the footfalls come in, they sound how they look. You know what I mean? Like he walks kind of crouched a little bit and very delicately. He's very intentional with where he places his
deliberate,
feet.
yeah.
Yeah. And it sounded that way. I know for all of the movements, instead of a clothes pass, it was a ribs pass. They had a couple of racks of wet ribs, wet, I think beef ribs.
Really?
That Steve was rubbing together to get his physical sounds, and like they did other things. They used like I think like a wet chamois or something like that, or a wet face cloth with some old 1/4-inch tape in it to get the gill movements to make them sound kind of
Didn't they
scaly.
use a rubber lobster for something?
Rubber lobster was part of the
right.
feat, yeah. I love that they have a rubber lobster at all. And they've probably been looking for a chance to use it for decades. And
Sure.
They
along comes
came
shape
along.
of
can
water,
finally write
right?
it off.
So that addresses the movement. The breathing was another thing, and it needed to be. It needed its own set of tracks. Literally, a whole bank of tracks was dedicated just to the breathing. From my side of things, that was to honor the story points in the script where they talk about him having 2 separate breathing apparatuses. One that breathes water, one that breathes air.
Because he can breathe, in both.
He can get out of water and survive. He's pseudo-amphibious, but it's not indefinite. He can't stay out of water. And so it needed to sound like his lungs were draining, his gills were draining the longer he spent out of water. And you can hear that peril. And that was all just sort of meant to be an homage to the sort of metaphor of love equals water, right? Because that's what it is. The longer he spends away from water,
the more
desperate
danger
he becomes.
is.
The longer he spends away from love, the more desperate he becomes, right? And so like the two things kind of link together. And so we kind of had to have that liquid draining from his gills as he was out of the water. And so if you listen to just his breathing, you notice that he grows more and more wheezy. We start bringing in a lot more of Guillermo's breathing, the more trouble he's in, you know. Whereas when he's just kind of getting out of the water, he's social, he's chipper, he's kind of just, you know.
Chipper.
He's putting the moves on Eliza.
Yeah, I know. So I wanted to ask you about that because obviously, you know, when Fishman is introduced, it's almost like a little bit more of a straight up horror thing. Like it's a scary, you know, we don't know, is this a really dangerous thing? But obviously, at some point, pretty quickly, there becomes a tender emotional attachment to Eliza. They're still separated through the glass, but they're still, you know, there's this emotional thing. And so, did the sound design of the creature change and evolve over the course of the film as their emotional relationship changes?
Very much, yeah. And that scene specifically, the first scene where she apprehensively offers him an egg, not sure, because they're both not sure, who is this, a monster or is this a creature?
Right.
Like, we don't know what he is, and there's a turning point in that scene, and that was that was meticulously rolled over so many times in the mix
So
stage.
that specific scene, she's got a phonograph, she's playing a record, and then
I'm talking about the previous scene. Where
Oh,
she
it'd be
first
before that.
introduces herself.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah, that scene, by the time we get to that scene, and you talk about the evolution, the first scene, we wanted to introduce him as a potential threat, right? He pops out of the water. We don't know what this is. He stands up. He's a very growly, you know, the animal elements that we went to for that were more along the lines of like, you know, lions and things like this. Whereas by the time we get to the record player scene, we were reaching for things like cormorants and pretty sort of oceanic birds, like egrets and things like that as the sweeteners, to give him a bit more delicacy and curiosity than he had previously.
And also just change the emotional tone, right?
Yep.
Yeah. That's great. That's amazing. And so these guys are building, coming up with this huge library of material. And then when did they come to the mixing stage? Like how many temps were there, and what was the process of going through that?
We had three temps. Yeah, we started the first one I think March, and then another month and a half later, and then
month between each.
There's supposed to be two, and then it turned into three.
There's never two.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think we started the finals for it in July. Yeah. June or July, yeah. And
But we did roll the temps forward. We didn't. No work was thrown away. At least not on the sound effect side of things.
Yeah.
Were you guys staying in Pro Tools the whole time, or how were you able to?
Yeah, the whole thing
Everything was in the box.
Yeah.
They'd kick stuff back to us. We'd, you know,
conform it,
add layers. Stage. Like it started as sketches, and then layers were added upon layers.
Because the way Guillermo wanted to work was, it's like, you know, when we got to the second temp, it was like, we're not starting over. This is like this is we're fine tuning.
Yeah.
Like so their temp mixes, their temp dubs, but we're just like fine tuning and getting, you know. Yeah. He's like, okay, that'll work this time, but on the next temp, I want that to be fleshed out even more and stuff like that. So
it
was
felt like a very rough sort of sample premix.
Yeah.
You know, and we build on them.
Yeah, and the mix was a joyous process because of it. Because except for the music, we knew what our target was.
Yeah, the music
we knew
was
what it was supposed to sound like.
Yeah, the music was the difference.
We were, I mean, I don't know, 60% of the way there, or maybe a little more by the time we got to the mixes, because we
by
knew
the time
how
you got
the
to the
movie
pre-dubs.
was, we knew what the movie was supposed to sound like.
And you guys did the temps in 5.1?
Yeah, the whole movie was done in, everything was done in 5.1.
Right. So tell me a little bit about the music. Obviously, Alexander Desplat, extraordinary composer, also nominated for an Academy Award for the film. So at what point did Alexander's track start to show up?
First day of the final.
First day of the final. We never heard anything. We heard nothing until the final.
Until the first day of the final.
Which is unfortunately all too often the way it works out. But so what were you guys working with in terms of, was there a temp score? How did you get through the temp mixes?
It was a temp score.
Originally, Guillermo went after no temp score, but then eventually they started using things like the theater downstairs diegetically and like sound sources like Mr. Magoo on the TV. They would sort of riff off of that stuff. And then they started adding other things that
most of that music was it had to be what it was, because like you saw, like they were living above a movie theater, so all that stuff is all the source stuff was the same throughout from beginning to end. From
And you knew
first
what all
to-
that material was before that stuff had all gotten cleared,
Yeah,
so you knew. So that's great.
except we got some better versions of it, more cleaner versions of stuff and all that. Which sometimes were.
We went back to the original.
Yeah, because most of these recordings were mono recordings and kind of not really hi-fi because they were 1940s, 1930s movies. So to spread those out to 5:1 and make them sound full was a lot of work for Chris to do.
Yeah, because the music's dipping around dialogue at some point, so you have to.
It was mixed for another movie, for dialogue in another movie.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I have to say, so I first saw the film at Telluride, but then I was at TIFF as well, and I was at the screening. But I want to say, was it in the Winter Garden where the film was actually shot?
We were so
the audience had an amazing response to being in the room with.
We wanted Guillermo to actually just have Doug Jones standing there in the fish suit when they opened the doors. So when the audience came in, but he didn't want to go for it.
Yeah. It was like looking through one of those mirrors, or like in those elevators that have the two mirrors, because you're in the theater and you're seeing the theater, and it was
very meta.
Yeah, I've never had an experience like that, like with the audience, like you say, right? When they
the audience
theater
crazy.
come up,
It was super cool at the end of that screening how the two people who were sitting in the seats where the drip landed on the movie watcher as well as where Eliza found the creature, those two people got prizes at the end of the night because they were sitting in the special seats. And it was totally random, right? Like we just showed up and everyone sat down
That's great.
and watched the TIFF premiere. But they rewarded a couple of people with something pretty special.
So talk to me a little bit about the sound design of Eliza's apartment. We've touched on obviously it's over the movie theater, but there's just such a wondrous sense of magic in that set and that environment. And how did you approach that environment from a sound design perspective?
Her apartment specifically would have been. Well, mainly atmospheres from a sound design perspective. There was very little sound design that was put in there, and that's really more Chris's magic. Using the theater downstairs to sort of emphasize, because there was a lot of sound source. That's what we were talking about before. That sort of diegetic sound source used as score. But I think you'd be
story of Ruth playing underneath, from the movie theater downstairs, and just keeping that in the room. Enveloping the characters with the music,
letting
it breathe, I guess, with the music,
letting that material do the work.
But also, in some instances, we used it as score as well.
Sure, yeah.
It wasn't just playing in the room.
Yeah, the creature
when the
creeping
creature-
toward the cat.
Yeah, all of a sudden
We raised
It's a beautiful
score.
piece of underscore there, right? Where you've got source music just playing as this score, but still it's mixed as source, but it's playing like score, and it's really
and the
effective.
same thing in what's her name's Octavia Spencer's house with Michael Shannon at the end. That music, that tense music is from the TV show that her husband is watching, and
it's great.
All became it's
and just sort of raising the level of that and spreading it out a bit more as the tension just to create that tension.
Yeah.
But
between the two of them.
It definitely gives a bit of magic to that environment because you've got what was already kind of a magical soundtrack already built, right? And so just one single sound source could give so much to the scene, right? And so that's one of those things I loved about this movie. There's all these situations where very little went in to give you something that was very special. Like it's similar to the silent shouting match, right? The sign language shouting match. Very little sound design went in, but very decisive mixed decisions took place. It was very subtractive and selective, and what you wound up with was something that sounded emotionally dynamic, right?
And also the way Dan Louston lit that scene, there were cracks in the floor, and he had subtle lighting coming up through the floor to give you that feel, that flicker, and that you were over a theater. It was quite ingenious.
It was beautiful. In fact, it was the inspiration behind. Like I actually went and recorded an antique Simplex 35mm projector because we saw some early images, and it was like, well, we have to honor that. Like that has to be honored, and so.
But I'm always really curious about that because when a director has a production designer build moments in that then you can use from sound design later on. Like that, having the flicker come up through the loose floor, that really opens up possibilities for sound design for you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it didn't stop there. Like the cinematography was part of all of that. Like just the way that the camera explores.
Yeah, there's so much movement in the camera that, you know, we were able to do some really amazing things with panning elements around with the characters and all that. That was kind
you
of
really
fun.
feel immersed in a world, which makes it really kind of a pleasure to pepper in details that you don't see, but you can feel them because they're.
And so then the other main location I wanted to touch on is the lab, which I presume was built on a soundstage.
Yeah, it was. Yes.
But from a sound design perspective, how did you that's a pretty big space and a very specific kind of, but also building connotations of 1962, Cold War, like there's a very specific vernacular of kind of movies that were out of that era. So how did you approach the sound design for the lab space?
With a sense of humor. Yeah, like really, that's the only way to put it. And honestly, it's not even just my sense of humor. I had a team of rock stars working with me on this sort of specific in background sound effects editorial. The guys I'm talking about are Tyler Whittam, Kevin Howard, and Dishan Naidu. And these three guys, they took on the lion's share of giving that space a personality. Like the fun, quirky, strange, almost like droid-ish, beepy, like beep, pop, pop kind of stuff that was going on out of the machines and things like that. There was always something sort of fun there to kind of undermine the tension that this is a top secret government. It was always a little bit, you kind of had to laugh a little bit as you undercut the severity of this environment. I think one of my favorite things is those golf carts, and we kind of gave them that like George Jetson-y kind of space.
That's great.
Like that kind of stuff. That silly, whimsical,
quirky,
sense of humor.
dysfunctional kind of. It followed the visuals, right? I mean, it was beautiful.
Because it is it's a lighthearted movie at the same time. It's got there's a lot of tonal shifts in the film that's really interesting.
It's a lighthearted way to deal with some heavy subject matter.
Yeah,
like he pulled that off beautifully.
For all of you in your conversations with Guillermo conceptually about what he wanted, did you look at other films? Were there any influences? Were there things that he kind of cited as things to look at?
No, I think he wanted it to be our own monster.
He wanted to do his own thing.
He wanted it to be. It was clearly an homage to so many things. Like you've heard him reflect back on being 6 years old, watching The Creature from the Black Lagoon,
right,
and wanting it to go well for the creature. You know what I mean? And this was his opportunity to do that. So, obviously there was a little bit of love given to honoring that idea.
But did that translate into we want to go back and listen to The Creature from the Black Lagoon and maybe emulate some elements? You were doing your own thing.
Yeah, not at all. Like there was never any sort of. He didn't put us in a box. He sort of let us make the box ourselves. You know what I mean? That's great. That was incredibly refreshing.
And trusting.
Yeah, he put so much faith in us to sort of help him come up with the rough sketch. You know what I mean? And then once he had that, man, he moves fast. He ran far and hard with it.
Tell me about Guillermo on the final mixing stage. Was he, and even during the pre-dubs, was he there for the pre-dubs? Was he there?
No,
he would come. Because there are certain directors who just come in for during the final for a playback and they give notes and they leave. What's his style?
Well, he was in and out for most of it. Like we'd be alone for 3 days and Sydney would sort of lead the mix, and then we'd have Guillermo. He'd fly in or whatever. Like the guy had a million things on the go at once, so we'd have he's going to be flying in for 3 days, but he's got to be on a flight at 5 o'clock, so we have to get and then we'd start the playback and. He'd get notes, and then all of a sudden he would turn to his assistant and go, "Can I get on the 8 p.m. now?" And then we're like, "Okay, I guess we're here for longer." And then can you switch that to midnight? And we're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
But it was. But he would sit there and we'd do all the fixes with him, and then we'd go on to work on for another couple days, and then
you could always tell when he was having fun.
Oh yeah, he was great. He was great. He threw out the Hulk feet metaphor many times.
He did what?
You know,
Through the Hulk feet.
mix of
called? Hulk running.
Hulk running. You know, if you've never seen the scene from what movie?
Modern Romance.
Modern Romance. Gotta check that out. That's right.
I do remember that. That's a great reference. That's a great reference.
I think you saved the picture.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that came out a few times. And
Anything else will take a day.
Well, like I said, before we got started, I put out a call on social media for some questions for you guys. And this was one that was interesting. And I want to just kind of pitch this out there because I think, you know, we all tend to be so consumed with whatever the challenges are of the specific film that we're working on. But somebody wrote, have you noticed audio trends over the past decade in your work and your peers' work, and have there been stylistic changes in film soundtracks in the past 10 or so years? I thought that was an interesting question.
I think that there have been, and I want to say that they've kind of happened concurrently, right? Like it depends on the people building the track. You know, I'll go and listen to someone's track, you know, several times, and I'll notice an evolution. But at the same time, another designer might be doing something that runs completely opposite to that. Like one designer may really focus on making sure that the track is lush and that you hear everything, whereas other sound designers will sort of drill down into it more with their mixer, and they'll make selective choices so that, you know, you hear one thing. You know, you might have a building collapsing over here, but they want you to hear this thing. Do you know what I mean?
Using the sound to kind of shape the attention, or
to really focus what you're intended to look at. I think I've noticed those kinds of trends lately, like in modern sound design. People are you know, sound designers, to my ear, are starting to figure out how to guide your eye a little bit better using your ears.
Mm-hmm. Does that echo for you guys on the mixing stage?
To a certain extent.
So, yeah. I was going to say, one thing I've noticed a lot more of is a lot more quiet. Like people starting to use quiet as opposed to just blowing stuff, like always trying to swing for the fences.
Yeah.
You know, it's so much harder to mix something quiet than it is to throw everything at it. You know, it's be subtle.
I can attest to that.
Yeah. Because the tracks from the location have to be pristine. You have to be able to, you know, make it work.
I was going to say that, is that there seems to be a move toward maybe more in terms of dynamics, but maybe with the advent of more sort of experimental score as well. Mm-hmm. If you look at what those guys did with Dunkirk, which I think was fantastic work, and kind of even more of a blurring of sound design and music, less of a reliance maybe on traditional kind of dramatic orchestral movie score, and maybe something a little bit more, a little bit more interesting.
I think you guys have nailed it. It's actually one of the things that's been coming up in these conversations more and more lately is the blurry line between sound design and score and dynamic range. Mm-hmm. It seems like directors are much more willing to play with silence.
There's room for everybody.
Which is great.
Cool.
It just
well, look
makes
at the problem
more...
it caused during Star Wars, where they had to actually put the note
We'll be
on
recording
the
with them in a couple of weeks, and we'll definitely bring that up.
Where they had to actually put a notice up saying that that's the direction of the movie, that they went to silence when the thing exploded because audiences were complaining.
Silence is brave.
Yeah. No, exactly.
It takes a lot of bravery to turn it down, man.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you guys just one last question. To me, and Glenn and I were talking about this before we started the podcast. All 5 films this year, truly amazing work. I think it's a wide open race. I think any of these films could walk away. But the work is just extraordinary this year. But I wanted to ask you guys, were there any tracks that really that maybe didn't get nominated this year that really impressed you guys that you heard that kind of blew you away?
I love the track on Get Out. I thought that was a great track. Yeah.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah. What was it about the Get Out track that you responded to?
Delicacy,
yeah, that's it, exactly. Yeah, it's just they just pick their points, man. Like it was
loud is easy, and it wasn't always loud.
Right.
Yeah, it's good, really good track.
Well, fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, absolutely. No, thank you guys. I mean, this is a first time nomination for all of you, right? Your first Oscar nominations.
Yep.
So you guys are obviously, you've come to Los Angeles. Tomorrow is a big day. It's the nominees lunch, which I've never been nominated for an Oscar myself, but my friends who had been tell me like this is the most fun part of the process.
We've heard that, yeah.
Because you're going to go to the Beverly Hilton Hotel,
Beverly, yeah.
and basically everybody who's nominated for an Academy Award, actors all the way down to us lowly sound folk, get to go in and have lunch together, and they'll take a big class picture, and everybody says it's like the most fun because everybody's still a winner, right? And everybody's relaxed and having a good time, and apparently the wine is very good and free flowing.
Right.
So you got that.
We'll look forward to that.
You got that to look forward to.
Look forward to that. The red eye flight home.
And then you guys have to go back to yeah. So before we leave, I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity. Obviously, there were a lot more folks that worked on this track than just the five of you. Any shout outs you want to give? You've talked about quite a few people but you guys obviously Deluxe Toronto was where you did the mix.
Yeah, that's correct. And we have to shout out Phil.
Phil
Hosick, our mix assistant. So he was
Yeah, and I have to shout out to my team, Steve Switzer and Jason McFarlane, my two boom men, and Sylvain Arsenault and Paul Ghost. Paul did a lot of the rain stuff, so he braved that, and they were all terrific.
I need to give a huge shout out to Jill Purdy, who not only worked on this film in our department, but was also co-supervised Mother.
Oh, wow.
Supervised that track with Craig Hennigan.
With Craig Hennigan.
Yeah, she's no slouch, man. Like she could be.
Because that was a
damn good track.
That was a pretty impressive track.
Actually,
as well.
I should actually add that to Get Out is that track is amazing and so overlooked because of its subtractiveness.
Yeah.
Right, and
the house was a character in that film.
Totally, and she was instrumental on that track, right? And she's been, we've worked together for a long time, and she's just a world-class individual and editor.
Well, for those of you who are listening, who are interested, we also did a podcast with Craig Hennigan and Darren Aronofsky.
I saw it,
in which we talked about that film quite a bit. So
damn straight.
Take a listen for that.
And then I would love to just continue my shout-outs. I know I've mentioned Tyler Woodham, Deshen Naidu, and Kevin Howard. I'd also love to add Alex Bullock, who took on a lot of the weaponry work and some of the preliminary water stuff for me. He helped out a lot during the early stages of the temp. And then it's also worth giving a big shout out to Rob Hegedus. He was our music editor, along with Cam McLaughlin, who was the associate picture editor, but made a lot of the early stages sound editorial choices for music, and has been credited as a music editor on the film and brought along for the MPSE nomination that they got, as well as Dustin Harris, who was sort of a third music editor.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. It's been really great talking to you. Yeah, absolutely. And have fun tomorrow. Best of luck when you get to the Dolby Theater in a few weeks for the show. This is Glen Kaiser from the Dolby Institute talking with the amazing team nominated for both sound editing and sound mixing for Shape of Water. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it, guys.